Good morning and a very warm welcome to the 32nd Education and Skills Committee. Today we have apologies from Jamie Harcourt-Johnson and Oliver Mundell is here to substitute, and we also have indication Mr Neil will have to leave at 10 o'clock this morning. Remind everyone to turn their mobile phones to silent and other devices for the duration of the meeting. Our first agenda item is to decide whether to take agenda item 3 in private. Does any member object? Then that's agreed, thank you. Our next agenda item today is an evidence session on the draft budget 2021-22, and I'd like to welcome to committee again John Swinney, MSP Cabinet Secretary for Education, Skills and in the Scottish Government, and could I invite the Cabinet Secretary to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning. I welcome the opportunity to give evidence to the committee on my priorities for the forthcoming Scottish budget. When I gave evidence to the committee in September in schools opening, I recognised the very significant impact that the COVID pandemic has had on our children and young people, and that will continue for some time to come. The Government has reprioritised and invested additional resources to respond to the needs of children and young people and the organisations that support them in their care and learning throughout the pandemic. We've supported our universities and colleges with more than £90 million of additional funding invested to support research activity, the state's maintenance and additional university entrants. We've also provided emergency funding to increase the discretionary hardship funds available to support students. We've invested £60 million in the development of a young person's guarantee, and we're providing an additional £155 million over the next 2 years to support education recovery in schools, including £75 million to recruit additional teachers and £5 million to recruit additional teaching assistants. By the end of November, 1,423 additional teachers and 246 support staff had been recruited through this mechanism. The COVID-19 Children and Families Collective Leadership Group has ensured that action has been taken at national and local level to support vulnerable children, young people and their families. The £100 million winter plan will make an additional £23.5 million available to support families for these services. We have maintained our investment in the expansion of early learning and childcare while allowing local authorities flexibility to deploy 1,140 hours funding to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic, and will deliver the expanded entitlement across Scotland from August 2021. The need to continue to mitigate the impacts of COVID on our children and young people will clearly feature prominently in our budget priorities for 2021-22. It remains the defining mission of this Government to improve the life chances of our children and young people through excellence and equity in education. While the committee will appreciate that I cannot yet confirm any specific details of the spending decisions that will underpin the 2021-22 budget, I can assure members that these decisions will reflect my priority to improve outcomes for all children and young people in Scotland. And I'm very happy to answer the questions of the committee.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. I'm going to move to questions from the committee, and could I invite Mr Green?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Good morning, colleagues. I'm going to just get straight in there with the funding issues, just to set the scene here and get a feel for where the Cabinet Secretary is lying in terms of his budgetary ask of the Finance Secretary. First of all, I'll start with our university sector. We know that this financial year, the Scottish Funding Council's own figures report a £176 million deficit, described as a substantial deficit in the university sector. And the university sector itself, in their submission to the committee, said, and I quote, that current funding is inadequate for the quality of experience that students deserve in Scotland. Cabinet Secretary, do you agree or disagree with that statement? And if you disagree, can you explain why?
I think the university sector is and has been strongly and well supported financially by the Government, and the resources we put in place are designed to ensure that our universities are able to perform in the world-class fashion that many of them are able to do so. So the resources that we've put in place they increased in the last financial year. In the course of the COVID pandemic, we've put additional resources into our universities, as I set out in my opening statement, and obviously maintaining a sustainable approach to university funding is critical to ensuring that the universities can continue to perform in a very strong fashion. So I think there's a strong funding record there for universities, and obviously I want to make sure that that's maintained in the period to come.
So essentially, you disagree that the current funding levels are adequate, and you would say that the deficit isn't an issue for universities, because effectively they're saying to us that the average funding per student it has been cut by £750, that the average funding per student is below that of other higher education institutions in other parts of the UK, and effectively the added effect of, which we all understand, COVID and the events of the last 9 months have dramatically reduced some of the cross-subsidy income methods that they've had. They have some very specific asks of you, Cabinet Secretary, but specifically their main ask really is that they get the level of funding per pupil that pays 100% of the cost of teaching, and at the moment we know that that is below 100% of the cost of teaching. Do you think the government will have plans to raise the levels of funding per pupil?
I think at the outset of my answer, I think obviously I have to make clear, and as I made clear in my opening statement, that I will have to return on numerous occasions, no doubt, in this session to the fact that the government hasn't yet set a budget. So I can't answer definitively on where we will end up with many of these questions, just given the timing of this session and the timing of the budget. But there are, so with that caveat in place, obviously we are working with the university sector on ensuring that there is sustainable funding in place for the future. That's a clear policy priority of the government to make sure that is the case. I don't think it'll be a surprise to the committee that the government faces funding asks from a range of different organisations that normally exceed the resources that are available. So we enter into dialogue with the institutions and organisations and budget holders on that question. I have long experience of that from my previous incarnation as a finance secretary of many years. So it's not an unfamiliar position to hear funding asks that are beyond what is currently provided. I think the third point, and this is an important point, is that universities are entirely independent institutions of government. They do attract a lot of public funding, but they attract funding from other sources as well. And I think what our approach to university funding has always taken the form of reflecting the fact that there are a range of different funding streams that come into universities, and not all of them can be neatly compartmentalised into some individual activities and propositions, because there is a huge amount of cross activity between research and teaching, and therefore the drawing of hard lines between individual sectors and compartments is rather difficult. So we will have a discussion in the round with the universities around these questions. We always do so, and we'll look to make sure that we can produce the most sustainable package we can to support university funding.
Thank you for that response. I appreciate that they are independent of government, that they are affected by government policy decisions, and the primary one being the settlement of funding that they agree with the Funding Council on what is paid in subsidy by the government for the tuition of pupils. So they are hugely affected by policy decisions at a political level made by governments in that respect. So there is an added responsibility on the government to approach that. But there is one area of tertiary education which has less flexibility in its ability to raise revenue, and that, of course, is our college sector. Our college sector, I would say, is probably almost entirely dependent on direct public funding and is unable to raise funds in the same way that other higher institutions can. We know that the 1920 financial year there was an operating deficit of £9 million, and this year it's forecast to be £15 million. Now that's come down a little bit since we probably previously met Cabinet Secretary, from 25, but that's largely down to some cost savings they've made, and also income saved from the job retention scheme, as many college staff have been on furlough. But obviously that won't last forever, and colleges are already making cuts at a vital time. Liquidity is the biggest challenge facing a college sector. What is the budget going to do to address that deficit, given their reliance on public money?
Fundamentally, I want to make sure that all colleges do not face any of the liquidity challenges that Mr Green raises, because it's absolutely vital that our college sector is able to make its way through what I recognise are difficult times at the present moment. So the Funding Council is actively engaging with the college sector and individual colleges to make sure that the colleges can be supported through any operational difficulties that may arise, quite simply because of the impact of COVID and the impact that may have on the flow of resources into individual colleges. So I would want to assure the committee that a very active monitoring role is performed by the Funding Council in relation to the sustainability of individual colleges and institutions. The second point I would make is that obviously we have been identifying particular resources that can be deployed within the college sector that will meet specific purposes. So the college sector is very heavily involved in activity around the Young Persons Guarantee. It's also very heavily involved around the National Training Transition Fund and the Flexible Workforce Development Fund. So out of those three activities, we expect there to be at least £20 million of additional resources going into the college sector, which will be supporting outcomes for young people and students who are working through the college sector. And obviously that will help to support the sustainability of colleges. So a combination of ensuring that we have in place a very close attention to the sustainability of individual colleges where they may face some liquidity challenges of the type that Mr Green raises with me, and then also funding to support the delivery of educational opportunities in a time when we are quite clearly facing some significant challenges within the labour market and within economic activity in general.
Absolutely. There's nothing to disagree with there, Cabinet Secretary. The problem is, though, if they're making cuts, and those cuts include staff, they include lecturers, and that inevitably leads to a loss of training places, of courses, as colleges shrink. Surely this is the time to be investing in our colleges, reduce their deficit, get them back into positive balance, and reverse those cuts in staff that they're having to make. They're having to make them not through choice, but through necessity, because they're running out of cash in the bank. It's as simple as that. Surely at a time when we need to get people retrained and reskilled, we should be supporting our college sector, not watching it on its knees.
Well, I wouldn't characterise the situation as anything like that. I've set out in my answer a moment ago the additional resources the government is putting into the college sector with exactly the objective of doing what Mr Green puts to me in his question, which is to make sure that there are the educational opportunities for students through the college sector, through the investment we're making through the Young Persons Guarantee, the National Training Transition Fund and the Flexible Workforce Development Fund. So those are resources that are going into the college sector to do exactly what Mr Green puts to me as the challenge, with which I'm completely in agreement. I want to make sure that there are opportunities where the labour market is likely to tighten. We've not seen the harshest of that tightening yet. The labour market figures yesterday indicated that that is not yet happening, but there is every possibility that will happen. So we want to make sure there are the educational opportunities there. So I think a combination of the 2 points that I raised in my earlier answer, of that specific funding focused on the creation of educational opportunities that will meet the needs of individual students, plus the the watching attention of the Funding Council, and if necessary, the intervention of the Funding Council to make sure that colleges are sustainable is an important part of the relationship we have with the college sector, because we want to make sure that the colleges that are located in all geographies around the country are able to be accessible fundamentally by their local labour market and their local population, to make sure that people have got the opportunities to which they are entitled.
Thank you, Convener. I'll let others ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Can I bring in Mr. Gray?
Thanks very much. And I'd just like to pursue Jamie Green's line of questioning a little bit further, Cabinet Secretary. In the evidence that we've received prior to today, firstly from Colleges Scotland, they say that by the end of this financial year, it is estimated that 33% of colleges will be operating with less than 5 days cash. And University Scotland tell us that 6 universities will have less than 2 months of cash reserves by the end of the year. I mean, you've talked a lot about sustainability there and about some additional money through, for example, the Young Persons Guarantee. But this is really an existential crisis for some parts of our tertiary education sector. Can you explain to us how the budget will ensure that we move towards real sustainability?
I think that's based on 3 foundations. First of all, that the government has consistently provided very strong levels of funding to the university and college sector, and that has been assured and sustained over many years. Secondly, by the nature of the interventions that the government has made on a number of occasions during the course of the pandemic. I've talked about some of those in relation to my answer to Mr. Green in relation to colleges, but in relation to universities, there have been additional interventions around additional support for research activity. The government put in £75 million of additional research income to the universities to support them through the difficulties that were being experienced. We've also put in additional capital to support the undertaking of essential maintenance activity within the university and college estate. And then thirdly, by ensuring that we maintain an active dialogue and a willingness to support institutions as they navigate their way through these challenges. And that's the role of the Funding Council, and the government monitors this issue very closely with the Funding Council. The Funding Council undertakes the monitoring, the government engages closely with the Funding Council on these questions, respecting properly the parameters of statute in this respect, to make sure that we are doing all that we can to support our institutions. And obviously, if the committee looks back at the scale of the estimation of the challenges that we're facing, our institutions go back over several months, the committee will be aware that the scale of that financial challenge has reduced significantly from what was anticipated to be the situation. But in the process, the government has put in new and additional investment to support activities within the tertiary education sector. And we'll continue to maintain that dialogue to make sure that we're doing all that we can to support.
But surely, if we look at the evidence from University Scotland, for example, it's not true the government has provided strong levels of funding sustained over the years. They point out that if we look at the core and very welcome government policy of free tuition for Scottish students in Scottish universities, that the funding from government does not cover the cost of the students' learning. And we also see from their calculations that that gap has grown over the years, so that it's now, as Jamie Green, I think, referred to, £750 per student, lower than it was some 5 years ago. It's over £2,000 lower than the funding of students, for example, in English universities. Now, if free tuition for Scottish students is a central Scottish Government policy, as I think it is and has been for a very long time now. Do you not think, Cabinet Secretary, that you are duty-bound to actually fully fund that engagement in university for each student? Do you not think you have an obligation, especially in times like this, to actually fully fund your policy?
I think the government is strongly funding our institutions. We saw last year the investment in the university sector increased last year by 2% to £1,140 million, £1.14 billion, an increase on the previous year. And as I've indicated to the committee already in my earlier answers, university funding comes from a range of different sources, and the government is a very substantial funder of activity within the university sector. Now, in addition to that, during the course of the pandemic, the government has also put in additional resources to support the sector as part of the work to recognise the financial challenges that are faced by institutions. So I think when all of that is taken in the round, it represents a very strong degree of funding settlement, which enables our universities to do the vital work that they undertake and to attract the investment to Scotland that they do. So there's a whole range of different factors have to be taken into account as part of the strongly founded commitment of the government to fund the university sector sustainably.
Well, the additional support for universities which has been provided is additional places, every one of which actually carries a cost to the university because government is not funding them fully, plus support for research, which is also funded at around 80% of its full cost. So you'll understand, I think, Cabinet Secretary, if the sector themselves feel that they've not really been supported here. When we've discussed this in committee in the past, the fact that these student places are not fully funded by the Scottish Government, you have indeed made the point that universities have other sources of income. But these sources of income are largely fees from overseas and income from things like student accommodation. All of these income streams are in jeopardy because of the pandemic. So wouldn't you agree that of all years, this year, or the budget year that you're considering now, is the one where finally the Scottish Government should meet its obligation and actually fully fund university tuition fees for Scottish students attending Scottish universities? Wouldn't that be an enormous step forward, which you could commit to now?
Well, I think the Scottish Government has been fully meeting its commitments to the university sector. So I reject the central premise of Mr Gray's question. I think the Government has been doing that and has been doing that substantially. Mr Gray rather glides past some of the other investments the Government has made. £75 million of additional research income for universities is a substantial commitment to the work of our universities, and that assists universities in taking forward some significant parts of their activities. So I think when members of the committee step back and look at the totality of resources that the government is making available to our universities and looks at that within the context of the wider activities and income sources of individual universities, I think it looks very clear and demonstrable that the government is providing substantial resources to universities, particularly in a context where we face constant pressures within the public finances and where we have seen, as I narrated a moment ago, an increase in the core budget provision, which took place in this current financial year, added to by the additional investments that have been made around the pandemic. Now, of course, there are particular elements of financial strain that are faced by universities because of the current situation. But I would also say to the committee that the estimates of the significance and the scale of those factors is lower than it was some weeks and months ago. And obviously we're working with the sector to make sure that we minimise any of those difficulties and that we support institutions where they may face challenges. And that's precisely the work that the Funding Council is undertaking on an ongoing basis on the government's behalf.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Can I invite Ms Mackay to ask her?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. We know that the government has announced free school meals, £22 million for low-income families and £23.4 million to keep vulnerable families, to help vulnerable families. We also know that the number of children with additional support needs has reached a record high of 2,226, 838 this year. So can I ask what provision has been made to deal with the ongoing impact of COVID to vulnerable children, and what work has been done to understand the impact of additional COVID-19 resources on vulnerable children?
Kavina, I think that there's a number of different elements that are drawn in here, which are not all just within the sphere of the education portfolio and education budgets, and the points that Rona Mackay raises look fundamentally at how does the government in the round support vulnerable children and their families. Over the course of the pandemic, we've undertaken essentially what I would call two landmark investments. The first was the investment of £350 million in a variety of different welfare supports that were in place to make sure that vulnerable families were able to be supported through the pandemic, and that was the distribution of those resources was fundamentally led by the Community Secretary, Aileen Campbell. That involved providing food support and active support through a number of different organisations to vulnerable families. In addition to that, there was the second tranche of investment, which was the Winter Plan for Social Protection, which was supported by £100 million of resources, which involves support to low-income families. It involves additional support to help the work of to support vulnerable children in the care sector, in social work activity, the work around digital inclusion, support around fuel bills, and a variety of other measures. So there's essentially a combination of investments that have been made, and then added to that has been the very focused work that's undertaken on free school meals, which we have sustained through the Christmas holidays, the February break, and Easter time yet to come. So we recognise the challenges that COVID is posing to families, particularly vulnerable children with vulnerable families with vulnerable children, because of the impact on income as a consequence of COVID, and that will continue to be a central part of the priorities of the government. In addition to that, Rona Mackay raised with me the questions on additional support for learning, and this has obviously been a very significant area of activity for the government. The publication of the review by Angela Morgan, I think, is a really focused piece of work which merits strong action by government and local authorities. I'm very pleased to have reached agreement with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities on the actions that are necessary to take forward that work, and obviously that will be part of the ongoing agenda to make sure that the needs of every individual child are met through the education system and through the wider support that we have available.
Thank you. That's good to know. So there'll be an ongoing evaluation of what's needed for additional support needs children and vulnerable children, in the budget when you're in a position to do that.
That will be one of the key priorities that we have within the education portfolio. It's vital that the policy intent of getting it right for every child is able to be reflected in all of the steps that we take forward as a government, and we do that in partnership with local authority colleagues. So there is obviously a read across from the work that is undertaken within my portfolio into the work that is generally undertaken within the work of local authorities as part of the ongoing support to meeting the needs of every child in every circumstance.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you very much. Can I just remind members, if they do have a line of questioning, could they please put an R in the chat, and I'll invite Mr. Johnson to come in next.
Thank you very much, convener. I wonder if you'll permit me, Mr. Swinney, just to take a step back a little bit. You know, I think we've had an awful lot of controversy around exams and so on, and I rather wonder whether or not we have over-focused on grades rather than what those grades represent. And it's absolutely important that people get the grades that they deserve. But we also, I think, need to make sure that they also have what those grades represent, which is skills and knowledge. And given the great level of disruption that many young people have experienced through this year, there is inevitably going to be gaps in their knowledge. So I'm just wondering what steps the Cabinet Secretary is looking at to fill those gaps, to level up the skills and knowledge so that they are ready to take on the next stage of their education, whether that's at college or university, or indeed simply just to take on the next step of their school education.
Cabinet Secretary, it's a wee bit away from the budget, but if you're willing to answer, please go ahead.
No, it is on the budget because it needs spending.
Yeah, I think everything perhaps needs spending to give Mr. Johnson his way into this questioning, but I don't think he needs any help in that respect from me. I think this is a very important issue, and I recognise it to be fundamental. It's actually why I have been so focused on trying to maintain participation in education for young people. I think if we look back at the trends of Scottish education over many years, we see steadily improving levels of attendance at school and participation in education. Now, essentially, I'm not making a flippant point here, but unless young people are engaged in education and at school, then there's no way they'll acquire the skills and knowledge that is required for their next stages in life. So that simple point of engaging young people in education is absolutely fundamental. And I think one of the great achievements of Scottish education in recent years has been to significantly improve that engagement and participation in education at whatever level it's happening. I am agnostic on whether that education takes place in a school or in a college, for example. So if a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old child is not engaging well at school, but can engage in a college provision, then that is, in my view, fantastic, because they're engaging in some form of education. That engagement in education is crucial, which is why it's been so important to get our schools open and why it's been so important to sustain that activity over time. I think Mr. Johnson focuses correctly on an important issue of ensuring that young people are able to acquire the necessary skills and knowledge, which is why the recovery curriculum that we've put in place has been so focused on making sure that we could resume the learning opportunities of young people and essentially address any particular gaps that are in place. Now, those gaps are addressed in a number of ways. They can be addressed within the school curriculum, where we've given very clear curricular guidance as to what should be the focus of learning. They can also be reinforced by the work that is underway through the National e-Learning Offer, which is providing post-school study opportunities for young people to enhance their skills and knowledge, and these opportunities are being very well participated in by young people the length and breadth of the country. It's a digital offer, so there's very wide accessibility for that. And then obviously we've expanded the size of the teaching population. We saw yesterday the publication of the teaching statistics, the number of teachers. We're at the highest number of teachers in our schools since 2008, with an increase of about 1,400. And I expect if that census was taken in September, If the census was taken today, that number would be even higher because of the investment that we've made of the COVID-specific resources. So I hope that gives Mr Johnson a flavour of the measures that are being taken to try to essentially address any loss of opportunity for learning that is experienced by young people as a consequence of the pandemic.
Thank you, Mr Swinney, for that answer. And indeed, I mean, it addresses the steps that have been taken while the pandemic is underway through the current school year to address the issues that are faced both by young people and schools. I mean, I would like to look forward a little bit, and this is absolutely where there's the budget question. So, if the steps that he sets out addresses what has happened in the current academic year, what are the steps and interventions that he's looking at for the coming academic year? Because that response may well look different. And indeed, if we look at the gap in knowledge, that will require additional interventions to level those young people up. So is that simply a question of extending the additional teachers? Is that about providing, I know the Conservatives have suggested, tutors? Another idea might be to implement summer schools or get early intervention from universities and colleges in the summer term into schools. Are there schemes like that are being looked at by the government and will be included in the budget so that as we have vaccination and move past the academic, we can level up young people?
I certainly view all of the interventions that I've talked about as being necessary to be sustained for some time to come. So the National e-learning offer, for example, that will be continuing as an ongoing priority, and essentially that provides a deliverable tutoring opportunity to young people the length and breadth of the country, because it's actually, I think it's a more dependable offer than tutoring, because it essentially is available to young people. We cannot be certain the mechanism by which tutoring could be delivered to young people within Scotland, because it would essentially, it would have to be compatible with the restrictions that are in place about movement within the context of the pandemic, and that obviously puts some limitations on the work that can be undertaken there. So there's the continuation of the National e-learning offer. Obviously, we've recruited more teachers and more staff, and there will be provision within the 2021-22 budget for the continuation of those roles. That was the basis upon which I set out the financial commitments previously to the expansion of staff. And obviously, there is the opportunity for us to see some further fruits of the investment that's been made through the digital learning programme, in which we are supporting the provision of devices to close the digital divide, which directly addresses some of the issues of access to learning that are available for individual young people. And that's an ongoing programme that the government has in place. So I recognise the fact that we will have to sustain many of these activities in the period going forward. And then, of course, this also then comes into the very fundamental part of the government's agenda around the closure of the poverty-related attainment gap, where our sustained commitment to Attainment Scotland funding has been at the heart of the work that we wish to take forward to close the attainment gap and to address any challenges and barriers to learning that may be experienced by children who have a background in poverty.
Thank you for that. And to please the convener, I'd like to ask one final question that relates directly to numbers. So we need to, in order to understand the challenge, we need to be able to measure it. So I was just wondering if the Cabinet Secretary could tell me if he knows how many school days have been lost through the pandemic, and likewise, his answers in terms of how that's been addressed has been very much through the e-learning and additional teacher offers. So could he tell me to what degree that e-learning has been taken up, particularly how many hours of that have been accessed by young people? And finally, is there a commitment to obtain those 1,400 additional teachers, not just for the duration of the short-term emergency, but on a longer term basis and on a permanent basis in our schools?
I set out when I announced the provision on the additional teaching resource that would be split between 2021 and 21-22. So that commitment is there over the course of the next next financial year. Now, in addition to that, I can't give Mr. Johnson specific numbers on the number of hours of e-learning that have been undertaken. But what I can say is that there has been a very significant upsurge in the utilisation of the GLOW system, which of course is the digital learning system that Education Scotland provide to school pupils in Scotland, a very substantial increase in the utilisation of that and also substantial use of the eSchool mechanism that we have in place. So I can happily provide some further detail to the committee in writing in response to the questions that Mr. Johnson has put to me. So that will be a I think the use of these approaches will be fundamental to sustaining the education of young people. But I do come back to the fundamental point, which I think has been the significant achievement of Scottish education of recent months, which has been to ensure, in very difficult circumstances, the safe return of children and young people on a full-time basis to school education, which has been undertaken since the 11th of August and has been sustained in almost all cases since then. Now, obviously, there has been some variation around the country. There are some schools who have had more difficulty and challenge with COVID than others, so there will have been variation in the education of young people, but schools are committed to making sure that is properly and fully addressed, and that will remain the case in the period as we move forward.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I ask a quick supplementary, Cabinet Secretary? And it goes back to your comments about where young people can acquire necessary skills and qualifications. If I could draw an example of Real-Time Music in my own area, which is a charity established to support young people who are now an SQV level accredited centre, and is working with schools and also with the wider community. So it's really just a question about how the budget can support community learning development projects and how you're able to influence that, given that a lot of that will be delivered by the third sector and local authorities.
There's two ways, essentially, Convener, in which we can do that. The first is through some of the channels that I talked about earlier on, where the government has allocated resources to third sector organisations to essentially support a lot of community development activity, which is then of benefit in individual localities. And the example that you cite will be, is likely to be one of those type of projects in that category. One of the other points is that in the Education Recovery Programme, I allocated £2 million of additional funding to the youth work sector, which is being distributed through a dialogue process involving YouthLink Scotland, to make sure that we could reach as many of these valuable projects that support learning within the community, that don't ostensibly look at first sight, well, they're not a school, but they are obviously supporting learning and engagement within communities. I think one of the very important lessons that we have learned in recent years has been the very significant benefit that ventures of this type, the type of the music venture that you raised, Convener, can actually perhaps be the first link in establishing a connection with education by young people. So a young person might be disaffected from school, but they may be able to be engaged in education through a project of the type that you raised with me, and then that can perhaps lead to a re-engagement with education. So part of what we're trying to do is to find all the available means and opportunities whereby a young person can sustain their engagement with education. And I think that the measures of a youth work nature are critical in that architecture of support that's in place.
Thank you very much. Before moving on, can I just put on record that we've received apologies from George Adam this morning, and then move to questions from Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, I'd like to just initially briefly return to the issue of college funding, but to take it from a different angle. You'll be aware that college lecturers have once again voted in favour of strike action over the specific issue of lecturing posts being replaced by instructor posts, which are paid less, have different terms and conditions. This is essentially a repeat of the same dispute that has happened every year for a number of years now. That I would characterise as college management not honouring an agreement they came to with lecturers. Colleges Scotland would make the case that this is fundamentally a budgetary issue. They cannot, they say, afford the number of lecturers that there currently are in Scotland on the basis of the budget settlement that they currently receive. Do you believe that this is a budgetary issue, or is this an issue of policy, the recruitment policy and the workforce policy for each college?
I don't see how it can be a budgetary issue, because the government fully funded the increased cost to the college sector of the pay and conditions agreement that was arrived at in 2017, if my memory serves me right.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That will be most useful as this dispute moves forward. Moving on to my primary line of questioning that's around the teaching workforce. For the first time that I can recall, though you might want to correct me, that there may have been other years recently, the teaching statistics on employment for new teachers this year show more new teachers on temporary contracts than on permanent ones. Now, I presume that's because of a combination of pupil equity funding and, more significantly, the 1,400 additional teachers that were recruited specifically because of COVID and the emergency funding that was introduced for that. Now, this is ultimately a budgetary issue. So how are you going to prevent either a wave of unemployment next summer as those temporary contracts expire, a similar situation to last year where newly qualified teachers are displaced and unable to find work, or the permanent casualisation of teaching as temporary contracts become the norm?
There's a number of points in this question that I'll work my way through, Convener. The first point is that the prediction of the size of the teaching workforce is a particularly challenging task. And in my political lifetime, I've seen periods of teacher shortages, and I've seen periods of an excess number of teachers available for employment. So it can either be feast or famine, bluntly. And what we try to do is to navigate our way through the middle to try to create sustainability in the teaching workforce. Now, that will never be a precise science, so there will inevitably be times in there where we may have too few teachers, or there may be too many teachers available. And anyone that suggests that this can be done with precision is, I think, peddling false hope, to be honest. We try to minimise those gaps and those differences, but I think the idea that we can always avoid teacher shortages, or we can always avoid having more teachers available for employment is not a robust line of argument. What we've tried to do is to make sure that we are creating enough educational opportunities to initial teacher education to be boosting teacher numbers on an ongoing basis as we expand the teaching workforce. And of course, the teaching workforce has expanded significantly under my tenure as Education Secretary, to the point where we have teacher numbers announced yesterday which are the highest since 2008. Now, the mixture of permanent positions and temporary positions is quite a sensitive balance, because I think actually looking at the long-term prospects of teaching profession, particularly in relation to, for example, temporary contracts around about PEF funding, has always been an issue that's concerned me. Obviously, local authorities are individual employers, but where PEF funding has been in place with, for example, 5 years of line of sight commitment from the government, I don't really think there's much justification for giving people a temporary contract. Because if the government's giving a commitment to a 5-year programme, which was central to the government's agenda, then I don't really think it's reasonable for temporary contracts to be issued. I can't issue the contracts because I'm not the employer. Local authorities are the employers, but I don't think that's particularly reasonable, because with 5-year line of sight, I think there's plenty of opportunity to give permanent contracts. Now, in relation to the teachers that have been recruited as a consequence of the pandemic, I've obviously given essentially 2-year line of sight on that. We said that these costs were met over the course of 2021 and 21-22, and that commitment's already been given. And then obviously in the general turnover of members of staff that will exist within the teaching profession, there are always retirements that are taking place. I would think local authorities would have sufficient line of sight to be able to give more permanent contracts than temporary contracts to new staff.
Thank you. I take your point about it being the highest number of teachers employed since 2008. I mean, that's statistically correct, but it's also the highest proportion of the teaching workforce on temporary contracts since, I think, quite a bit before 2008. It's more than 1 in 10 teachers who are on a temporary contract. Now, taking what you've just said about at least the 2-year continuity for those who've been employed via COVID funding, how then are you going to prevent this coming summer looking like the last summer for newly qualified teachers who were initially simply being displaced by others, were unable to find, whether it was temporary or permanent work, were simply unable to find teaching work until the government stepped in. Now, some of them still haven't, but on the whole, once the government stepped in, NQTs were able to find work. How will you prevent that from being the case this next summer if we're continuing with rolling temporary contracts for a specific purpose?
Obviously, I want to make sure that we've got sustained investment in the teaching profession, and that we are able to take forward the high levels of teacher employment that we have. And I think it is really welcome that we've got teacher employment at the level that we have, the highest since 2008, 53,400 teachers. So it's a really welcome a new high level within the teaching workforce. So obviously I want to sustain that, and I've given the commitments that I have around the financing of 2021 and 2022 to support that. And obviously we will be doing all that we can to sustain that degree of employment in the years to come. Now, obviously, within the teaching profession, there are a number of different roles. There are, there's been all sorts of discussion about the role of supply staff. Supply staff are a critical part of the running of the education system, because they inevitably provide additional capacity to the education system at moments where it's required. So there'll be opportunities within that, along with the permanent posts that we've put in place. And then there's obviously the point on turnover of staff that is always a feature of the education system. So our workforce planning is designed to address all of those questions. As I said, it's unlikely ever to be a precise science, because there are so many complex moving parts within that discussion, but ensuring the presence of a strong and sustainable teaching workforce is a key priority for the government.
Thank you. I've got one final question, Convener. The number of teachers in early years is continuing to decline. It was 1,200, I think, in 2014. As of the statistics released yesterday, there are 729. children have a right to access a nursery teacher, but as we've discussed before, in practice that's meaningless when there simply aren't enough of the nursery teachers to do more than support other early years staff. There are not enough nursery teachers to have substantial direct contact with children, certainly. Why do you think the number of nursery teachers has declined so rapidly?
I think it's because of the changing nature of the qualification mix within the early years sector. And obviously there's a much higher number of staff now coming into early learning and childcare, not with teaching qualifications, I accept, but with much higher levels of qualification in the early years system. So I think what is happening is that we are seeing a different balance within the qualification mix within the early years, but fundamentally, and I think independent evidence substantiates this, young people are acquiring a strong educational foundation within early learning and childcare as a consequence of the professional mix that is available within the early learning and childcare. So you have more individuals coming in with higher levels of qualifications, but you don't have as many teaching staff within early learning and childcare. So it's a different mix of professional staff, but it is in no way a diminution of the educational direction and substance of education within early learning and childcare.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Can I invite Mr. Mundell to ask his questions?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Deputy First Minister. I'm interested in the impact of COVID on the new schools, programme or Schools for the Future, and I just wondered what that would mean for my constituents when it comes to particularly Dumfries High School, which is not fit for purpose, not wind and watertight, and really has been needing rebuild since before I was elected in 2016. And I just wondered, will projects like that still go ahead?
In terms of the Schools for the Future programme, there is one school. This is the previous programme. One school which we would have anticipated should have been finished by now, but will be slightly later, and that I expect to open in April. I think I'd better just caveat myself that I'd better write to the committee if I haven't got that detail precisely correct, but I think it's April is the opening date. So that's for the Schools for the Future programme that we have, that we've been working to essentially to complete. There is then the Learning Estate Investment Programme, and I announced the first phase of those projects earlier on. Those are all taking their course, and I expect to be able to make a second phase series of announcements on the Learning Estate Investment Programme very shortly, which will set out the further direction of travel on these projects. But in relation to COVID delays, I think I would attribute COVID construction delays to the delayed opening of the one school under the Schools for the Future programme. I don't think there'll be any substantive delays in the Learning Estate Investment Programme as a consequence of COVID, because many of these projects are in the development stage and will be able to take their course. So I don't envisage any significant factors of that nature, and it certainly is not stopping us from proceeding to make the Phase 2 announcements very shortly.
And do you think there'll be enough money available in the budget for Phase 2 to make sure that every school in Scotland is wind and watertight? Obviously, parents in Dumfries find it unacceptable that water pours into the building that their children go to be educated in, and I think they look frustratedly around when they see rightly so new builds and other improvements to school estate, but the school that their children go to is not wind and watertight. Is that something after 13 years of government you think can be put right in this budget?
Well, after 13 years in government, the number of schools that are in an A and B condition, which is a good or satisfactory condition, has increased from 64% of schools to 90% of schools. So, when I came to office 13 years ago, 2/3 of schools in Scotland were deemed to be good or satisfactory. That's what my predecessors thought was okay, but we've got that up to 90%. So that's a pretty substantial amount of progress on an issue which, of course, Mr Mundell will know, is the statutory responsibility of local authorities. That's what the education legislation makes clear, that local authorities are responsible for maintaining their school estate. But the government, of course, has intervened to support a school refurbishment and new school building, and we've got to the position where 9 out of 10 schools in Scotland are in a good or satisfactory condition. Now, that's obviously, I want to build on that, which is why we've taken forward the Learning Estate Investment Programme. The programme has been committed to financially by the government over a long number of years. It's not a short-term programme. You can't do that, that can't be the substance of a one-year financial commitment. So the government has given the commitment to the Learning Estate Investment Programme over the long term. So I don't think that will not be in any way affected by the passage of the budget.
But you do accept that for parents in Dumfries, where you're in one of those 1 out of 10 schools that's substandard, you'd be pretty angry, looking at water coming in through the ceiling in Scotland in a school, and the fact that anyone would think that was acceptable. Whoever's statutory responsibility it is, people would think that was unacceptable, and they would want to see money put aside from government funds to help make sure that the school that their children went to was wind and watertight, let alone of an acceptable standard.
I think, Convener, to be frank, the government's got a really strong record to be proud of in enhancing the school estate. When you come to office and 1/3 of the schools in Scotland are in a position where they're neither good nor satisfactory, and you reduce that to 10% after years and years of austerity, I think is a pretty solid achievement by the government on something that is not the government's statutory responsibility. It is the responsibility of local government to manage its school estate. So I think there's a huge amount of progress been made, but clearly I want to make sure that young people are educated in good or satisfactory buildings around the country, and that's why the government has committed to the Learning Estate Investment Programme. It's why we've done so much work on the Schools for the Future programme. It's why so many young people are now being educated in better conditions, and we're committed to doing more of that in the future.
I'll leave it there for now, Convener, but I think that will come as little comfort to pupils at Dumfries High School. Thanks.
Can I invite Ms Wishart to ask her questions, please?
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to follow on Ross Greer's line of questioning about the statistics that were released yesterday about the nursery teachers working in ELC settings. And as Ross quoted, in 2014 there were 1,200 and now there are 729. And I note Cabinet Secretary said that this was about the changing nature of the qualification mix. But we know that some councils have been moving their workforces away from nursery classrooms as a money-saving exercise. A teaching qualification makes somebody more expensive to keep. And a teacher in a nursery can be replaced by others in the ELC workforce who can be paid less. So in this instance, would that not fail to recognise the reality of the budget on the classrooms?
No, I think it diminishes frankly, it diminishes the skills base of members of staff who are going through an educational process to make sure they can contribute effectively to the learning of children in early learning and childcare. I think there are different qualifications have been developed to ensure that we can strengthen the educational base of staff who are involved in early learning and childcare. I think that's been a really positive achievement and a really positive aspect of progress that's been made in recent years. And the quality of early learning and childcare is testament to that change. So I don't view that in any way as a bad thing.
Thank you for your answer. Professor Pasi Sahlberg on the International Council of Education Advisors said in February this year that, quote, "It's wrong to think that the smaller the children are, the less education the teachers need." So do you think that there is a narrowing of the skill set in the workforce?
Not in the slightest. And Pasi Sahlberg is a huge admirer of Scotland's approach to early learning and to our approach to the curriculum. And I think I think it's essential that those. I totally agree with Pasi that the learning that is associated with early learning and childcare is absolutely fundamental to ensure children are equipped with really solid foundations for their educational journey. And I think that can be provided by the sophisticated level of education that is available to the range of early learning and childcare staff that we now have. And I think their commitment to that and their approach to the acquiring these qualifications is something to be warmly welcomed.
Thank you. For my final question, can I turn to ASN classroom assistants? In September 2019, the Scottish Government announced that it would provide £15 million of funding for the recruitment of 1,000 classroom assistants to support children with additional support needs. Has the Scottish Government monitored this recruitment, and can the Cabinet Secretary offer an update, please?
I think I'll need to write to the committee with a specific update in that respect, but obviously this is an issue that would be taken forward through the recruitment practices of individual local authorities, and we make those funds available to local authorities for that particular purpose. But I will update the committee on the specific details in the light of Beatrice Wishart's question.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Can I invite Mr Gibson to ask his questions?
Convener, and good morning, Deputy First Minister. On the 25th of November, the Chancellor announced that teachers and most other public sector workers who earn £24,000 a year or more will have their pay rise for 2021-22 paused. Obviously, there are Barnett implications. So what's the Scottish Government's view of this?
Clearly, the issue of public sector pay is an issue of great sensitivity. In the context of what we're wrestling with in COVID, public servants have made a very significant contribution to sustaining our public services in very difficult conditions, and we are profoundly grateful to all of them for all that they have contributed, and that obviously includes the teaching workforce as well. So obviously the policy position adopted by the United Kingdom Government has an implication for us. The Cabinet will be looking very carefully at issues of pay policy, and the Finance Secretary will set out the approach that's been taken when she sets out the budget at a later date to establish the parameters of pay policy, and obviously negotiation will come as a consequence of that.
Okay, thank you. Now, the National Union of Students has pointed out that many students were very hard hit by the pandemic and prevented from working, for example, in hospitality and other sectors, and I should say my two sons were in that position. And most students are not eligible for universal credit, and those who are face delays in support, with those living in areas of deprivation potentially most adversely affected. So I'm just wondering what the Scottish Government's view is of the NUS's request for additional discretionary funding being made, given that situation, given the fact that the UK Government doesn't seem to be willing to move on eligibility for universal credit.
I think this is a significant issue, and we have, of course, already both accelerated hardship funding, that's discretionary funding that's been available. We brought forward about over £11 million of discretionary funding for earlier access during the pandemic. We've also supplemented that with an additional £5 million of resources, and obviously we're considering carefully the point that's been advanced by the National Union of Students, recognising that the issue of access to employment for students, particularly in hospitality, for example, is a significant challenge at the present moment. So we're looking very carefully at that point that the National Union of Students has put to us on discretionary funding.
Okay, thank you. Now, 6 universities anticipate having less than 2 months of cash reserves by the end of July. I'm just wondering, for comparison, what's the Scottish Government's cash reserve?
I actually would have to write to Mr Gibson about that question, as I would have known that in the past in my finance secretary responsibilities, but I can't give Mr Gibson an up-to-date picture on that, but I will write to the committee on that question.
It is, however, significantly less than 2 months. Is that not the case?
Well, let me write to the committee to give a definitive answer on that point. But yeah, as Mr Gibson will know, the Scottish Government is able to hold a very limited amount of resources for particular purposes in the cash reserve. But I'll give him an up-to-date answer on that question.
Now, on universities, you made significant provision for enough places in universities and colleges to ensure no one was crowded out. So what has been the financial implication of that for our universities, and has that been fully funded by the Scottish Government?
We're still working through all the detail of all of that, but our best estimate at this stage is that the additional cost will be of the order of about £12 million, and that will be funded by the Scottish Government. But we're still working our way through all of the details of that in consultation with institutions.
Thanks. Now, my colleague Arona Mackay and others have touched on additional support needs, and I've been astonished that the number of pupils with additional support needs has grown from 37,504 just a decade ago to 208,765 last year. That's a more than 5-fold increase, and it now includes 27% of primary school children and 35% of secondary school children, with the numbers apparently continuing to grow year on year. So I'm just wondering why we've seen such a colossal growth. Do children have more needs than they had a decade ago? And what are the budget implications for this? Because EIS in their submission have raised concerns that the growth in the number of additional support needs teachers and support staff obviously not kept pace. I mean, how could they with that phenomenal rate of growth in demand? So given this, I wonder if you can explain what the situation of this is, because to me it just seems quite remarkable, and what additional resources have been put into to address this growth, and whether or not the Scottish Government anticipate the growth in such numbers continuing to rise year on year. Although one wonders if that is the case, how soon children with additional support needs will be the majority.
Fundamentally, the growth in the numbers of young people with additional support needs has been about changes that have been made in the definition of additional support needs, therefore essentially to broaden and capture fully the various needs of children and young people within our education system. Now, there will, of course, within those totals be very wide variance in the requirements and needs of individual young people, from some very acute interventions that are required to relatively minor, if any, interventions that are required. So the range is really very significant within that larger number that Mr Gibson puts to me. So that explains the change in the data and the numbers. Beyond that, obviously the fundamental commitment of our approach to education for children with additional support needs is to try to ensure that that education is delivered within the mainstreaming, by the application of the mainstreaming principle. So we look to the whole education system to support the needs of all young people, as opposed to a particular grouping of staff providing that support to young people with additional support needs. Now, in that respect, of course, we are seeing several years of increased expenditure on education at local level. For example, in the most recent data that's available, there was a 4.1% increase in the amount of money spent on education at local level within Scotland. So we are seeing increases in the expenditure being applied to education at local level, and we look to that education system to meet the needs of all young people, given the variety of needs that young people will have.
I mean, I think that's an important point you've just made, but also in the figures of the 4.1% increase in real terms in educational funding, only 2.2% of the increase was in terms of additional support for learning. So additional support for learning, despite the huge growth in the number of children, is actually growing less. So I'm just wondering two things. One, if the Scottish Government is going to discuss with COSLA additional funding of additional support for learning. I know there was £15 million each year going in, but it seems inadequate given the huge number of children that are being added into that category. And for my second question, given this phenomenal increase, and you were talking about the huge range of differences that children with additional support needs have, what kind of additional support needs are categorised as being ASN now that weren't, for example, 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
On the first point that Mr Gibson puts to me, I would come back to my point that there is a fundamental policy shift that we aim to see young people with additional support needs, where they possibly can be, supported through mainstream education. So the benefit of the sustained increases in education spending at local level will be felt by young people with additional support needs, and not just in relation to the element that is essentially identified around additional support needs funding. In relation to the second point, there will be a broad range of needs that will be identified. They will cover a whole variety of emotional needs, physical needs, educational needs that young people will have, but the extent of that definition has been broadened very significantly to cover a wider range of young people, to make sure that the principle that underpins our policy of getting it right for every child can be the subject of what could be the means by which we identify what is the best approach to meet the needs of individual young children and young people within our education system. And that approach is designed to make sure that we can maximise the effectiveness of our approach to education to meet the needs of individual children and young people.
And just lastly, is there a definition list? Is there a list of what qualifies for additional support needs? Does it vary by local authority or by school, or is it standard for Scotland? And if so, is it possible to have a copy of that list? Because I'm not in my own mind exactly sure what is included and what might not be included in this, and whether or not it's a movable feast with the criteria changing each year, or if it's fixed.
Well, there are definitions within statute, and then individual local authorities will make their own assessment of the additional support needs of young people, and as a consequence will design their educational needs as a consequence. It comes back fundamentally to the principle of getting it right for every child and ensuring that we are taking all steps that we possibly can do within the education system to meet the individual needs of individual young people.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Can I have one final question, Mr Spinney? I know you're very aware of the work that the committee has done on music tuition and a report that we published on that. And we had a number of submissions before your appearance today pointing out that COVID has exacerbated a lot of the concerns that we had in terms of the ability to deliver music tuition and its long-term sustainability. And I just wondered if there's anything in budget for next year that the government is looking to improve that situation or influence that with COSLA colleagues.
I think there's two elements to this, Convener. The first is the direct effect of the pandemic, which unfortunately makes quite an impact on the practical delivery of music tuition. So it's not actually about resources, it's about the implications of the constraints created by the restrictions necessary to suppress the pandemic that make the delivery of music education more challenging. And I'm acutely aware of how difficult that is in an individual and in a school setting. And obviously there's a lot of, well, frankly, there's a lot of joy that our schools are not able to participate in just now because of the fact that music activity is so restricted by the constraints in which we're having to operate. The second point is that obviously we work very closely with colleagues on a shared, with colleagues in COSLA on a shared aspiration to encourage high levels of music participation within our schools. We recognise this to be a central part of our curriculum, and we work closely with COSLA colleagues to try to maximise participation within this. Now, we're greatly assisted in this effort by the work of the Music Participation Education Group, led by John Wallace, and we work closely with the group to expand participation in and awareness of the importance of music education within our schools, although I caveat that with the challenges that we face because of the pandemic and all that it is raising for us.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, but there are a couple of supplementaries on that one. If we could bring it back in.
Hello?
Mr. Gibson?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear you there. It was just a very quick question, Deputy First Minister. It was just that we know about the impact of the pandemic on the provision of music services. I'm just wondering if there are any other areas of education where the numbers accessing them have increased or decreased significantly during the pandemic.
Some of the, essentially the delivery of practical subjects has been an area which has been of particular challenge around music and drama. We've obviously been able to relax some of the constraints around physical education, which have made that more deliverable given the conditions outside, which make it kind of difficult at this time of year. So there are a number of subjects that have been affected, but as we proceed through the school year, we're trying to minimise the disruption that is faced by any individual pupils as a consequence.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Mr. Green.
Thanks, Convener. Just a quick one, Cabinet Secretary, on the SQA. Obviously, the role of the SQA has changed this year and is changing next year in terms of what they will be doing in the moderation and assessment of exams. Obviously, a chunk of their budget goes towards paying external markers. Can you clarify if the SQA budget is likely to stay the same next year, rise or fall? Have they made any requests to you for next year's budget? And if there are changes, will that reflect the changing role of the SQA? And related to that, the announcement that you made on payments to teachers for their additional workload in the assessment of pupils, will that come from the wider education budget or specifically from the SQA budget?
These are all interconnected issues. So the financing of the SQA involves, on an annual basis, a significant amount of expenditure on markers fees. So obviously we are taking a different approach for the 2021 diet, with which members of the committee will be familiar. So the requirement for markers fees will not be as extensive as would be required, but there will be a requirement for payments for SQA appointees to undertake moderation activities working with schools and local authorities on the development of the alternative certification model. So all of these factors are part of the determination of the SQA budget and the financial requirements that will be necessary to run the qualification system for this year, and obviously that's subject to a very active discussion at the present moment.
So just on that, sorry, presumably those cost savings, which it sounds to me like their budget's going down if you read between the lines, perhaps you can't confirm that today, but does that therefore free up cash that will fund the other policy that you've announced on paying teachers to do the job of SQA marking?
Well, there's as I said, there's an interconnection between all of these budget issues, and those issues are currently being discussed as we speak.
Okay.
I think that concludes questions from the committee this morning. Cabinet Secretary, thank you very much for your attendance at committee with us once again. This is our final meeting of 2020. We're returning on the 13th of January to take evidence from teachers, the SQA and Education Scotland on learning teaching in the senior phase. Can I take an opportunity to thank all of the Parliament staff on the record for their support during the past year. It's been a very different parliamentary experience for us all, and we do very much appreciate that and wish them the best for the festive break. Can we now close the meeting and move into private session on Teams with the committee? Thank you.